question is, but isn't there a new green emergence into a sustainable future? Wind energy, solar power, renewables as a solution for the ecological problems of capitalistic societies. No, I've got a new book coming out within the next couple of weeks, written with Max and Lier, called Bright Green Lies, which is about how wind and solar don't, in fact, help the planet. And there's a few directions to go with this. One of them is that there has been a co-optation or a destruction of much of the environmental movement over the past 30 or 40 years, where at one point the environmental movement was about protecting wild places and wild beings, protecting the living planet. And somehow, not really somehow, but over the past 30 to 40 years, that movement has been co-opted into no longer being about saving wild places and wild beings, but instead about continuing this destructive culture a little bit longer. I mean, look at the question: wind energy, solar power, renewables as a solution for the ecological problems of capitalistic societies. Do you think that desert tortoises really want solar harvesting facilities on their land? Do you think that birds and bats and ridgelines want wind harvesting facilities on their homes? I don't think so. Would seabirds and would fish and would oceans themselves want for islands to be built in the North Sea for wind harvesting facilities? Does that actually help the planet? No, it doesn't help the planet at all. What it does is it fuels the economy, and it is appalling that environmentalism and so-called environmentalists push this. It's Rachel Carson did not save birds from pesticides so they could be offered up on the altar of wind energy. And so part of it is, first off, the values have been changed, and the fact that we can even ask this question, and it's a good question, and the fact that it's a good question is horrifying, because yes, environmentalism has been effectively destroyed and turned into, here's a way to think about it. You can get 100,000 people marching on the streets of Washington, D.C. or Paris or New York, and why are they marching? They're saying that they're marching in order to protest global warming and to save the planet. And if you ask them for their specific demands, they will tell you they want subsidies for wind and solar. So basically, the environmental movement has been turned into a lobbying arm of a sector of the capitalist economy. And that does not help fish. It doesn't help anybody, any non-humans. And ultimately, in the long run, it doesn't help humans. What it does is help maintain industrial civilization. So the first problem is they're not even pretending to save the planet anymore. What they're pretending, they're pretending to save the planet, but what they're really doing is pushing further industrialization. Heck, there have been some very interesting studies about the greatest threat to habitat over the next 50 years, according to projections on what this culture is trying to do, that show that the greatest threat is not mining, agriculture, urban expansion, but instead the expansion of wind and solar facilities. That's the greatest threat to habitat. So anyway, first, their point is not to help the planet. The point is to bring on more energy. The second is that because of something called Jevons paradox, which you can look up yourself, I'll do a very short version of Jevons paradox, which is Jevons was an economist in the 19th century who studied coal use. And what he found is that when coal use became more efficient, it didn't actually decrease the demand for coal as you would expect. You would think that if you can heat something if you can get a big coal furnace that is running your industrial process, if you can make it use half as much coal, well, you'd think you'd use half as much coal then. But that's not what happens. What happens is that allows you to expand your factory. And so now you're actually using just as much coal as before, but you're using more of other resources too, because your factory is now twice as big for the same energy cost. So, and this is true across all forms of energy. As oil and gas came on, wood use did not decrease. It actually increased with coal and gas added. When they brought on hydro, it didn't decrease any of the others. What it did is it added hydro to the mix. Every time they add on a new energy source, it increased the use of energy. So adding on wind and solar has not decreased the use of oil and gas. What it has done is made more energy available for server farms, Bitcoin mining, marijuana growing, which is one of the major uses of marijuana in the states where it's become legalized. It made all of those industries explode, and with their commensurate use of other resources. So wind and solar don't help the planet because they weren't intended to help the planet. 2, wind and solar don't actually decrease coal and oil. 3, they're based on mining, and there are entire regions of the planet have already been destroyed for rare earths mining, for lithium mining. Solar and wind harvesting facilities don't grow on trees. They're mined with all the commensurate damage. They're transported, and when they're done, they're dumped into landfills. And in the meantime, they destroy habitat. And so wind and solar don't help the planet, and they also are not, they're not even capable of running society. They require, as Ozzie Zaner calls them, they're basically alternative fossil fuel use, because they require fossil fuel use at every part of the production, at every part of the transportation, at every part of their use, and for their decommissioning. So no, wind and solar, basically wind and solar pushed by environmentalists shows, if anything, the poverty of the modern environmental movement.